This is Box Brain. I'm making a sandbox action RPG set in a procedurally generated medieval fantasy open world, where the initial focus of the game is on building your own little army of NPC characters, like this one here, to fight hordes of goblins and collect loot and build up this initial army. So today's update is on apples, and here's a quick demo on how they work. So if you look at the top left corner in your HUD, there is now a hunger score below your health score. So this hunger, now it's implemented into the game. So you'll get hungry over time, and if you're full, if your hunger is above 9 or higher, you will also recover health over time. So this is actually the first way for the player to be able to heal themselves. Let's get this villager to follow me. Okay, so if you eat these apples, they will fill up your hunger, and that's how you can now heal. So these apples will spawn on one of 3 slots on an apple tree randomly. And after a while, they will ripen and they will fall off the tree and then bounce and roll to kind of a random position around the tree, as you see here. On top of that, all of the characters in the game, including, just like how the player gets hungry, all of the other non-player characters, including villagers and goblins, they will also get hungry as well. And if they're full, they will also heal over time as well. So now this becomes a way for the villagers to heal themselves, and also for you as the player to be able to feed and sustain your own army. And then when any mob gets hungry, they will seek out food, just kind of like what you saw here. They will detect that there may be food around them, and then they will go and eat the food and fill up their hunger bar, essentially. So the reason why this is super exciting is that this is for one, it's the start of kind of some of the simulation aspects of the game, like a farming simulator and a survival simulator, where hunger is really probably the most important core motivation in any kind of survival game. So that dimension to the game has now been added. And then on top of that, this is also, foraging is the first ecological behavior where mobs kind of now behave beyond kind of just fighting the player. They now have an additional motivation. They behave in a way that's motivated to seek out the food. And it also kind of gives them some personality. The fact that, the villagers will look for food when they get hungry, and same with the goblins. And then when they kind of hone in on the same food source, they will naturally engage in some kind of conflict. And then finally, and probably most importantly of all, this is actually the last item in the core gameplay loop of this initial game, where you're fighting goblins. You can see Goblin just ate an apple on the bottom left there. As you're fighting goblins and collecting all of these gold coins and building up your army, before your army would kind of die and you couldn't really sustain your army. Now this is the way to heal your army, heal yourself, and kind of keep playing the game as your army gets bigger and bigger, and you'll be able to use the army to, fight more goblins and gather more loot. So I'll share a little bit of, the new gameplay while I talk about kind of what were some of the challenges with making the game. One of the challenges in getting these apples to work was just getting the animation right. I was having trouble figuring out whether the animation should be controlled by the apple object itself versus by like the tree that contains the apple. So in the end, I was actually able to refactor a lot of this inside the apple, and it just sends a signal to a tree just to tell the tree that it's, when an apple ripens, it no longer needs to be on the tree, and the tree can free up the slot and spawn more apples. So it ends up simplifying the apple tree's behavior quite a bit, and that makes it way more modular. So the apple controls its own behavior, and there's less dependency with its containing parent container, essentially. So that was the first challenge. The animation was also tricky in itself in that it's actually kind of 3 separate animations. One is the actual drop animation, dropping down from the tree. Another is the bounce animation, which is handled by an animation player. And then lastly, it's the roll animation, which is the roll to a specific position that's done by using a tween. There's also this shake animation. So if you hit an apple, there's a 50% chance that the apple will drop. So you can, so there's that little shake as well. So altogether, figuring out how to use a combination of tweens and animation player to get the apple animated correctly was tricky. And then the last thing that was tricky about the apple spawning was figuring out like when does the apple belong inside a tree node versus when does it enter into the world. So there's a key moment in which after the apple falls, and actually specifically the moment is when the apple hits the ground. That's when the apple is considered ripe, and we actually move the apple outside of the tree and into the world, so then it can be eaten. Prior to that, the apple belongs into the tree, so you can still kind of walk through it. It fades away when you walk behind a tree, and so on. And then I guess the last thing I wanted to show was kind of the pixel art I did for the apple. The first thing, this is still one of my first pixel art works. Starting out, I've kind of starting to develop a process for how to do this. The first step for me now is to start looking at some references. So I took a look at this upper right here is the Stardew Valley apple. There's another one I found that I quite like with the palette. It's this kind of more pastel colored apple. And so I took inspiration from these in creating my own. And I ended up with a 8x8 pixel art apple that I was quite happy with. And then I actually also took a apple for my own room and just took a picture of it and used this as a source of inspiration as well. And one thing I noticed, there was more yellows, which I saw in some of the references as well. There was more yellows, and around the shadow parts there was more purple. So that kind of gave me the inspiration to vary not only the brightness. This was the previous version, and then after looking at the real apple, it inspired me to also adjust the hue, so the highlights are more yellow and then the shadows are more purple. So that actually made the apple feel quite a bit more three-dimensional. And just to show the palette in comparison, very similar palette. I tried to keep the palette quite simple to 4 or 5 colors with an outline. But just is the shading that I varied to not only change in value, but also change in hue as well. So those were kind of the main challenges from making this work. I guess next steps for this game is to add more balancing now that there is a core gameplay loop. I was playing the game quite a bit, and now I would say like previously the game had between 1 to 3 minutes of playtime. Now being able to sustain your army, the game now has like a 10-20 minute amount of playtime. So that's quite almost like a 10x jump in playability. So I'm going to be working on balancing and making the core gameplay loop fun. And that also includes like cleaning up the aesthetics of the town, the village, especially including like the outer areas where I haven't really spent as much time, kind of like it's a little bit plain. So cleaning that up and making the game world much more interesting and vibrant. And then also optimizing the balancing of the spawning. So in the forest world here, the goblins will actually will stop spawning, and if you kill the goblins, if you clear all the goblins in this world, it will stay that way. But if you go down into the cave world, that's where the goblins will constantly respawn randomly in this kind of procedurally generated cave. So if you want to fight infinite amounts of goblins, you want to come down here. But once you clear the village, it's going to become a safe place for you to build your army and heal and all that. And then finally, the next major feature is going to be idle speech, idle chatter for the NPCs. You've sort of already seen a hint of that here, where when the villagers grab and eats an apple, they will say yum. But there you go. But we're going to kind of expand on that. And if you have any suggestions for what kind of speech you want the NPCs to have, feel free to suggest that in the comments below. but we're gonna have different personalities. So you may have some villagers who are more aggressive or lazy or depressed or happy, right? And they're gonna say different kind of things. So that's gonna be the next major update. Hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think.